I signed the nursing home papers with a smile while my children watched, relieved to finally get rid of me. 3 months later, they arrived at my house with a realtor, ready to cash in. But standing in the doorway was a man they'd never seen, holding our marriage certificate and the new deed to my house. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. For 40 years, I lived in the same house on Maple Street, the one my late husband Robert and I bought when we were newlyweds back in 1985. I can still remember the day we got the keys, how Robert carried me over the threshold even though it wasn't our first home together, just because he wanted to make me laugh. That house became our whole world. It's where I raised 3 children, David, Susan, and Michael. Every room holds a memory. The kitchen where I taught them to bake chocolate chip cookies. The living room where we decorated the Christmas tree every year. The backyard where Robert built a treehouse that's still standing, weathered but strong. I was the kind of mother who never missed a school play, even when I had to leave work early and lose pay. I was the one who stayed up all night with sick children, measuring out medicine and checking fevers, singing soft lullies until they finally fell asleep. When Robert died of a heart attack 12 years ago, leaving me a widow at 56, I didn't fall apart. I couldn't afford to. I worked 2 jobs, one as a nurse at the county hospital and another doing bookkeeping for a local business, because I'd promised Robert that all 3 of our kids would graduate college without drowning in debt. And they did. David got his business degree. Susan became a teacher. Michael went into IT. I paid for every single semester. Even after they grew up and moved out, I kept that house alive with love. I baked cookies every Sunday, and the smell would fill every corner. I hosted Thanksgiving dinner for 20 people, spending days preparing the perfect meal. Christmas was my favorite. I'd decorate the entire house, inside and out, and my grandchildren would squeal with delight when they saw the lights. My door was always open. If one of my kids needed money, I gave it. If they needed babysitting, I dropped everything. If they needed advice, I listened for hours. I thought that's what mothers did. I thought that's what family meant. My grandchildren called me Nana, and I thought I'd spend my final years watching them grow up in the home filled with our family memories, the home their grandfather and I had built together with love and sacrifice. I imagined birthdays and graduations, teaching my granddaughters to garden like I'd taught their mothers, passing down recipes and stories. I pictured myself growing old in that house, surrounded by the people I loved most, leaving this world in the same place where I'd experienced my greatest joys. I was wrong about so many things. I was wrong about what family meant. I was wrong about loyalty. And I was wrong to think that 40 years of sacrifice would mean anything when money was on the table. But most of all, I was wrong to think my children saw me as their mother. Somewhere along the way, I'd become something else to them. I'd become an investment, an asset, an obstacle standing between them and a very large payday. This is the story of how I stopped being wrong. Life was simple and beautiful, the way I'd always imagined my golden years would be. Every morning I'd wake up at 6 o'clock sharp, even without an alarm. After so many years of early shifts at the hospital, my body just knew when it was time to start the day. I'd put on my robe, the soft blue one Robert gave me on our last anniversary together, and make my way downstairs to the kitchen. The house would be quiet and peaceful, filled with morning light streaming through the windows I'd cleaned just the day before. I'd make myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey with a splash of milk and 1 sugar, and carry it out to the front porch. That was my favorite time of day. I'd sit in the white wicker chair Robert and I bought at an estate sale 30 years ago, and I'd watch the sunrise over the neighborhood I'd known for decades. I'd see Mr. Harrison walking his golden retriever. I'd wave to Mrs. Chen as she collected her newspaper. Sometimes the Johnson kids would ride by on their bikes on their way to school, and they'd call out, "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret." Those small moments made me feel connected, alive, purposeful. After my tea, I'd tend to my rose garden, the one Robert planted for our 25th anniversary. He'd said, "A rose for every year, Maggie." There were 40 roses now, because I'd kept planting them after he died. One for each year we would have been together. I'd prune them, water them, talk to them like they were old friends. My neighbors used to joke that I had the most beautiful garden on the street, and I took pride in that. It was my meditation, my therapy, my way of keeping Robert's memory alive. Tuesdays were for volunteering at St. Mary's Church, where I'd help sort donations for the food bank and prepare meals for the community dinner. I'd been doing it for 15 years, and the other volunteers had become like family. We'd laugh and share stories while we worked, and I felt needed, valued, useful. Thursdays were my book club at the community center, where 6 of us ladies would discuss everything from mystery novels to memoirs. We'd drink coffee and eat homemade treats, and sometimes our meetings would run 3 hours because we'd get so caught up in conversation. Weekends were supposed to be for family, or at least they used to be. David would bring his 2 boys over, and I'd make their favorite chocolate chip pancakes, the recipe I'd perfected over decades of practice. The boys would eat seconds and thirds, and their syrup-sticky faces would remind me of when David was small. Susan would call every Sunday evening at 7, and we'd talk about her week, her students, her daughter's college applications. Michael lived 2 hours away in Pennsylvania, but he'd visit once a month, usually bringing his girlfriend who was sweet and polite. The house was paid off, thanks to Robert's careful planning and the life insurance policy that had saved me after he died. I had a small pension from my nursing career and my Social Security. I wasn't rich by any means, but I was comfortable. I could pay my bills, buy groceries, and even treat myself to lunch with friends occasionally. I had my routines, my memories, my independence, and my home. I thought I'd live out my days there, peacefully aging in the place where I'd experienced my greatest joys and deepest sorrows. I thought I was safe. I thought I was home. But I was starting to notice things changing. It started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September, one of those perfect autumn days when the air is crisp and the leaves are just starting to turn. David and Susan had both come over for lunch, which should have made me happy. It was rare to have 2 of them visit on the same day. I'd made pot roast, their father's favorite, and we'd eaten together at the dining room table like we used to when they were young. After lunch, I'd settled into my armchair in the living room, the worn leather one that had molded to my body over the years. The afternoon sun was warm through the window, and I'd had 2 glasses of wine with lunch, which was more than usual. My eyes grew heavy as I listened to David and Susan cleaning up in the kitchen. Their voices were a comfortable murmur, and I drifted off without meaning to, the way elderly people sometimes do in the middle of the day. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when their voices pulled me back to consciousness. I kept my eyes closed, still drowsy, not quite ready to rejoin the world. That's when I heard David say something that made my blood run cold. "This house is worth at least $800,000 in this market, maybe more. Mom's sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even realize it." His voice was low but clear, and there was something in his tone I'd never heard before. It was calculating, businesslike, cold. Susan responded quickly, her voice equally quiet. "I know, but we can't just bring it up out of nowhere. She's stubborn. You know how she is about this place." "She's also getting more forgetful," David continued. "Last month she called me twice in the same day asking if I was coming to dinner. She didn't remember we'd already talked about it. And did you see her struggling with her phone earlier? She couldn't figure out how to answer a text message." My heart was pounding now, but I kept perfectly still, barely breathing. I wanted to jump up and defend myself, tell them I'd only called twice because I'd been worried about the storm. That was coming and wanted to make sure he was driving safely. The phone issue was because they'd given me a new smartphone for my birthday, and I was still learning how to use it. But something made me stay silent, listening. "We need to start planting seeds," Susan said, and I could hear cabinet doors closing, dishes being put away. Get her thinking about downsizing, about how much work this house is, about her safety. If we're smart about it, we can make her think it's her own idea. What about Michael? David asked. He'll go along with whatever we decide. He always does. Besides, he needs money for that lake house he wants. He'll be on board. There was a pause, and then they were walking back toward the living room. I quickly arranged my face into a peaceful sleeping expression, forcing my breathing to stay slow and even. When they came in, they were all smiles. "Mom," Susan said softly, touching my shoulder. "Mom, we're heading out." I opened my eyes and smiled at them, playing my part perfectly. Oh, I must have dozed off. Thank you for coming, sweethearts. They hugged me goodbye, telling me they loved me. But as I watched them drive away, that cold feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I spent the next few weeks convincing myself I'd misunderstood. That's what we do when the people we love hurt us, isn't it? We make excuses. We rewrite the story in our heads until it's something we can live with. Sitting alone in my kitchen that evening after they left, I told myself that children worry about their aging parents. It's natural. It's normal. They weren't plotting against me. They were just concerned about my future, about what would happen if I got sick or couldn't take care of myself anymore. Maybe I had been more forgetful lately. Maybe I had called David twice that day, though I could have sworn it was only once. Maybe the house was getting to be too much for me. It was a lot of space for one person. The stairs were steeper than they used to be. The gutters needed cleaning and I'd had to hire someone. The furnace was old and would need replacing soon. Perhaps they were right to be thinking ahead. I tried to push the conversation out of my mind and focus on my routines. I watered my roses, attended my book club, volunteered at the church. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it kept growing despite my best efforts to ignore it. Then Susan called on Tuesday evening, right on schedule. We talked about her day, her students, normal mother-daughter things. But then, almost casually, she said, "You know, Mom, I was thinking, that house is awfully big for just you. Have you ever thought about downsizing? Maybe getting a nice little condo or apartment where you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance?" My grip tightened on the phone. "I like my house, honey. It's my home." I know, she said quickly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm just saying, as you get older, it might be nice to have less to worry about. No yard work, no repairs. You could travel more, enjoy yourself." I didn't want to travel. I wanted to stay in the home I'd built with Robert, but I just said, "I'll think about it," knowing I wouldn't. The following weekend, David stopped by unannounced. He walked through the house with a critical eye, pointing out things I'd never noticed before. "Mom, there's a crack in the ceiling in the hallway, and is that mold in the bathroom? You really should get these things checked out. Old houses can be money pits." "It's just a small crack," I said defensively. "The house is fine." "I'm just worried about you," he said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "This is a lot of responsibility for someone your age." Someone your age, as if I were ancient, as if I were helpless. But I smiled and thanked him for caring, because that's what mothers do. We accept whatever crumbs of affection our children offer us, even when we know there's poison baked inside. Michael called that Thursday. "Hey, Mom, random question. Have you updated your will recently? Just to make sure everything's in order?" "Why would I need to do that?" I asked, my heart racing. "No reason, just being responsible. You should really have all your affairs in order, just in case." "Just in case of what?" I wanted to scream. "Just in case you're planning something?" But I didn't. I made excuses for all of them. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. These were my children. I'd raised them. I'd sacrificed everything for them. They loved me. They had to love me, didn't they? The evidence arrived in my mailbox on a gray Tuesday morning in early October. I'd been trying so hard to believe everything was fine that my suspicions were just the paranoid thoughts of a lonely old woman. I'd almost convinced myself. Almost. I walked down my driveway in my slippers and robe, the morning air chilly against my skin, and pulled out the usual stack of mail: bills, grocery store circulars, a magazine I subscribed to. But there was also a large manila envelope with no return address, just my name written in Susan's handwriting. My hands were already trembling as I carried everything inside and sat down at the kitchen table. I opened the envelope slowly, and a glossy brochure slid out, along with a handwritten note on Susan's personal stationery, the kind with little flowers at the top that I'd given her for Christmas 3 years ago. The brochure was for Sunset Valley Nursing Home, assisted living and memory care for your loved ones, the cover proclaimed, showing smiling elderly people in a pristine dining room, being served by cheerful staff in scrubs. I flipped through it with shaking hands. The rooms were small and sterile, like hospital rooms trying to look cozy with floral bedspreads and generic artwork. There were photos of residents playing bingo, doing arts and crafts like children, being led in group exercises by unnaturally enthusiastic staff members. I picked up Susan's note, and her words felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "Mom, just leaving this here so you can look it over when you have time. We think it might be time to consider options where you'd have help and companionship. The place looks wonderful, and they have great reviews. It would give us all peace of mind knowing you're safe and cared for. Love you." Susan, help and companionship. As if I were incompetent, as if I needed supervision. I wasn't confused or senile or helpless. I managed my own finances, paid my own bills, cooked my own meals, drove myself to appointments. I had friends, routines, a life. What I didn't need was to be warehoused in a facility where someone would tell me when to eat, when to sleep, what activities I was allowed to do. My chest felt tight as I stood up and walked to the recycling bin in my garage, something nagging at the back of my mind. David had been here on Sunday, working at my desk while I made coffee. He'd said he was checking his email. I dumped out the recycling onto the garage floor and started sorting through the papers. That's when I found them, printed emails, folded and discarded, probably by accident. My hands shook so badly I could barely read them. The first was from David to Susan, dated 2 weeks ago. "We need to move quickly before the market changes. I spoke with Jim at Coldwell Banker and he thinks we can list it for $850K, maybe more if we stage it right." The next one was Susan's response. "Agreed, but how do we get her to go along with it? She's not going to want to leave." David's reply made my vision blur. "Once she's in care, we can get power of attorney and list the house immediately. I've already talked to Tom about the legal steps. We need to document any signs of forgetfulness or incapacity. Start keeping notes." I dropped the papers and gripped the edge of my workbench, my whole body shaking. This wasn't concern. This wasn't love. This was a calculated plan to take everything from me. They'd been plotting for weeks, maybe months, treating my life like a business transaction, my home like an asset to be liquidated. The denial shattered. The truth was staring me in the face, printed in black and white. My own children were trying to steal my life. The full betrayal came during a family dinner I hosted 2 weeks later. I'd found those emails, read that brochure, but part of me still wanted to believe I was wrong. So I invited all 3 of my children over, determined to prove I was perfectly capable, that they had no reason to put me away like some broken appliance they didn't need anymore. I cooked for hours. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh rolls. Robert's favorite meal, the one I'd made for every special occasion. I set the table with the good china, lit candles, put on a dress instead of my usual casual clothes. All 3 of them came, which should have warmed my heart. Instead, I noticed they exchanged glances throughout the meal, speaking in some silent language I wasn't part of. After dessert, David cleared his throat in that way he always did before delivering bad news. "Mom, we need to talk. We've been discussing your situation, and we all agree it's time you move to Sunset Valley. You're not getting any younger, and this house is too much for you to handle." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. "I'm handling everything just fine." Susan reached across the table and patted my hand in that condescending way people use with children. Mom, you're 68. You fell last month, remember? What if something serious happens and no one's here to help you? I didn't fall, I said, my voice rising. I tripped over the garden hose. That's completely different. You're getting defensive, David said, his tone infuriatingly calm. That's a sign you know we're right. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly, looking at each of them. This is my home. Michael, who'd been quiet through dinner, finally spoke. His voice was flat, emotionless. Mom, we've already toured the facility and put down a deposit. You're scheduled to move in 3 weeks. We have the date booked. The room tilted. You've what? You can't do that without my permission. David's expression turned cold, a look I'd never seen on my son's face before. It was the look of a businessman closing a deal with an inconvenient client. We're trying to do what's best for you. Mom, be reasonable. This house is a financial burden, and frankly, at your age, you don't need all this space. Once you're settled at Sunset Valley, we'll list the property and put the money into a trust for your care. A trust they would control, money they would manage, my entire life reduced to a line item on their financial spreadsheets. We've thought of everything, Susan added. The movers are scheduled. We've picked out which furniture you can bring. It's all arranged. It was all so carefully planned, so neatly packaged, so completely decided without me. And I finally understood with crushing clarity. I wasn't their mother anymore. I wasn't a person with feelings, rights, or dignity. I was an estate to be managed, a problem to be solved, an obstacle between them and $800,000. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying their words over and over. The certainty in their voices, the way they'd already made every decision, the deposit they'd put down with my money, without my consent. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. That's when I remembered the papers David had left in my study. He'd asked me to sign documents for estate planning purposes 3 weeks ago, telling me they were just routine updates. I'd been suspicious but too afraid to look closely. Now, standing in my darkened study wearing my nightgown, I turned on the lamp and opened the file folder he'd left on the desk. What I found made my blood run cold. They'd already contacted a real estate agent. There were printed emails with subject lines like Property Assessment 247 Maple Street and Estimated Market Value. They'd gotten 3 separate appraisals, each one higher than the last. Someone named Jim from Coldwell Banker had toured my house while I was at church, invited in by David with his spare key. There were photographs of every room, notes about staging recommendations, and minor repairs needed to maximize sale price. But it got worse. There was a draft power of attorney document already filled out, waiting only for my signature and a doctor's validation that I was unable to manage my affairs independently. There was a letter from an attorney named Thomas Brennan outlining the legal process for expediting guardianship proceedings for elderly parents, showing signs of cognitive decline. They'd actually consulted a lawyer about taking away my legal rights. My hands shook as I kept reading. They'd calculated everything down to the last penny. A spreadsheet titled Estate Liquidation Plan showed the house value at $850,000, my savings account, my checking account, the cash value of Robert's old life insurance policy that I'd kept, my pension payments, even the estimated worth of my furniture and jewelry. They'd inventoried my entire life and assigned dollar values to everything I owned. At the bottom of the spreadsheet was a section called Distribution Plan. They'd already divided it 3 ways. Susan wanted her share to pay for her daughter's wedding at some fancy venue. David planned to invest his portion in expanding his consulting business. Michael had circled listings for vacation properties in the Poconos, with notes about down payments and mortgage calculations. There was even a timeline. Week 1, move mother to facility. Week 2, list property. Week 4 to 6, expected sale. Week 8, distribution of funds. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every concerned phone call, every suggestion about downsizing, every comment about my forgetfulness had been part of a carefully orchestrated campaign. They'd been building a case against me, documenting anything they could twist into evidence of incompetence. And they'd been so confident I'd go along quietly, like a good, obedient mother who'd spent her whole life putting their needs before her own. They'd mistaken my kindness for weakness, my love for foolishness, my sacrifice for surrender. That was their first and biggest mistake. I sat at my kitchen table as dawn broke over Maple Street, tears streaming down my face, surrounded by the evidence of my children's betrayal spread across the surface. The spreadsheets, the emails, the legal documents, the calculated division of my entire existence into dollars and cents. I looked around at the home I'd built with love, and every corner became a weapon, stabbing into my heart. The wall in the hallway where I'd marked my children's heights every birthday, those pencil lines climbing, year after year. The kitchen where I'd taught Susan to make her grandmother's sugar cookies, her small hands covered in flour, laughing. The living room where we'd opened Christmas presents, where David had learned to walk, where Michael had said his first words. The memories crashed over me in waves, each one more painful than the last. I remembered working double shifts at the hospital, my feet aching so badly I'd cry in the car before driving home. But I'd still get up at 5 in the morning to make them hot breakfast before school because I'd read that children who ate breakfast performed better. I'd survived on 3 hours of sleep for years so they could have everything they needed. I remembered selling my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I'd inherited, to pay for David's college tuition when his scholarship fell through. He'd promised to pay me back. He never did. I told him not to worry about it. I remembered planning Susan's wedding on a shoestring budget after her father died. I'd used my entire savings account, nearly $20,000, so she could have her dream day. I'd made centerpieces by hand, addressed 500 invitations myself, and worn a dress from a consignment shop so she could have the designer gown she wanted. She'd cried with happiness. I'd cried too, but for different reasons. I remembered helping Michael through his divorce, both emotionally and financially. I'd given him $15,000 when his ex-wife took everything. I'd listened to him sob on my couch at 2 in the morning. I told him everything would be okay, that family was forever. Forever. What a lie that had been. The pain was physical now, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I'd given them everything, my youth, my money, my time, my dreams. I'd sacrificed my entire life so they could have theirs, and this was my reward, to be discarded, locked away, erased from my own story so they could cash in on everything Robert and I had built. I cried until I had no tears left, mourning not just my children's betrayal, but the death of something bigger. The death of the family I thought we were, the death of unconditional love, the death of loyalty and respect and basic human decency. I'd raised monsters, and I hadn't even known it. Or maybe I had known, somewhere deep down, and I'd just been too afraid to admit it. But somewhere between the darkness and the dawn, something shifted inside me. The tears stopped. The shaking stopped. And in their place came something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Pure, cold, clarifying anger. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the bathroom, catching sight of myself in the mirror. I looked like hell. Red, swollen eyes, hair a mess, face pale and drawn. A tired old woman with silver hair and wrinkles earned from years of smiling and worrying about people who didn't deserve it. But then I looked closer, and I saw something else. I saw Robert's eyes looking back at me. The same steel blue eyes that had fallen in love with a fierce 23-year-old nurse who didn't take nonsense from anyone. Where had that woman gone? When had I become so soft, so willing to be walked over? Robert's voice echoed in my memory, words he'd spoken during his final days in the hospital. I'd been crying, terrified of losing him, and he'd squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. "You're a fighter, Maggie. You've always been a fighter. Don't you ever forget that. Don't let anyone push you around when I'm gone." Promise me. I'd promised him. And then I'd spent 12 years breaking that promise, letting my children treat me like I was nothing. I gripped the edge of the sink and looked myself dead in the eyes. "No more," I whispered. My children had made a calculated move, thinking they were playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules, but they'd forgotten who taught them how to think strategically. They'd forgotten that I'd managed a household on almost nothing for years, that I'd navigated hospital bureaucracy and insurance nightmares, that I'd outsmarted and outworked everyone who'd ever underestimated me. They saw an old woman, a weak, sentimental fool who'd sign anything they put in front of her. They were about to learn they'd made a terrible mistake. I walked back to the kitchen with purpose now, my mind already working through possibilities. Let them think they'd won. Let them believe I was going quietly. But I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be smart, strategic, and several steps ahead. If they wanted to play games with my life, I'd show them I'd been playing the long game since before they were born. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in months: James Peterson. We'd known each other for 30 years. He was a retired attorney, sharp as ever at 72, and most importantly, he was someone I could trust. It was 6 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. He answered on the third ring, voice groggy. "Margaret? Is everything all right?" "James," I said, my voice steady for the first time in hours. "I need your help, and I need you to keep this completely confidential." "Of course. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "My children are trying to steal my house and lock me away, and I'm going to stop them." James arrived at my house 2 hours later with a briefcase and a grim expression. We sat at my kitchen table and I showed him everything. The emails, the spreadsheets, the power of attorney documents, the nursing home brochure. He read through it all in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he looked at me with genuine anger in his eyes. "Margaret, this is elder abuse, financial exploitation. We could report them right now." "No," I said firmly. "If we report them, they'll just get lawyers and tie this up for years. They'll claim they were acting in my best interests. They'll paint me as a confused old woman who doesn't understand what's good for her. I want them to lose everything, James. Their money, their reputations, their smug certainty that they can control me." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then we need to be smarter than they are. And I think I have an idea, but you'll have to trust me completely." Over the next hour, James outlined a plan so brilliant, it took my breath away. He'd been widowed last year after his wife passed from cancer. He was lonely, living in a retirement apartment he hated. And he had an idea that would solve both our problems. "Marry me," he said simply. I stared at him. "What?" "Not for romance, for protection. If we marry and transfer the house to joint ownership, your children can't touch it. They can't claim you're incompetent if you're making sound legal decisions with the help of an attorney, which I am. We'll do everything by the book. Prenuptial agreement, medical evaluations, video documentation. We'll make it impossible for them to challenge." It was perfect. It was devious. It was exactly what I needed. For the next 2 weeks, I played the role of my life. I agreed to tour Sunset Valley with my children, asking questions with just the right amount of confusion. I signed their papers after James had reviewed them, and we'd made our own arrangements. I acted like the compliant mother they expected me to be. Meanwhile, James and I were busy. We went to the courthouse and applied for a marriage license. We hired an independent attorney and drafted documents, a prenuptial agreement protecting both our estates, new wills, and most importantly, a quit-claim deed transferring my house to joint ownership. We scheduled medical evaluations with 2 different doctors who confirmed I was of completely sound mind. We installed hidden security cameras to document my daily activities and clear mental state. We married quietly at the courthouse with 2 witnesses. It wasn't romantic. There were no flowers or cake or white dress. But when James slipped a simple gold band on my finger and promised to help me fight, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. On the day before I was scheduled to move into Sunset Valley, James and I went to the county recorder's office and filed the deed transfer. The house was now half his, and my children had absolutely no idea what was coming. I moved into Sunset Valley on a cold Monday morning in November, exactly as scheduled. David, Susan, and Michael all came to help, which was almost funny considering they couldn't wait to get rid of me. They loaded my clothes, a few personal items, and some photographs into boxes, making a great show of being caring and concerned. "You're going to love it here, Mom," Susan said, hugging me at the entrance while a cheerful staff member waited with a wheelchair I didn't need. "They have bingo on Tuesdays and movie nights on Fridays." I hugged her back, playing my part perfectly, letting a few tears fall. "I know, sweetheart. You're right. This is for the best." The look of relief on their faces was almost worth the performance. As they drove away, I saw David on his phone before he'd even left the parking lot, probably calling the real estate agent. I spent exactly 3 months at Sunset Valley, and honestly, it wasn't terrible. The food was decent, the staff was kind, and I made a few friends. I played bingo. I attended craft sessions. I smiled and participated and gave every appearance of a woman who'd accepted her fate. Meanwhile, James visited twice a week, posing as an old friend, and gave me updates on everything happening with my house. The updates made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. My children had listed the house 3 days after I moved in. They'd hired professional stagers who'd removed my furniture and replaced it with generic pieces. They'd painted over the pencil marks on the wall where I'd measured my children's heights. They'd ripped out my rose garden to create better curb space. Everything that made it my home had been erased. The listing price was $850,000, and they received offers immediately. David rejected the first two because he wanted more. Susan posted on Facebook about making difficult decisions for aging parents and received dozens of sympathetic comments calling her brave and selfless. Michael had already put a deposit on a lake house in Pennsylvania. They'd divided my belongings among themselves. Susan took my china. David took Robert's tools. Michael claimed the photo albums. They argued over my jewelry like vultures fighting over a corpse. But the worst part was what they told people. James reported back that they were spreading stories around the neighborhood, that I'd been found wandering confused, that I'd forgotten to pay my bills, that I'd had a small fire because I'd left the stove on. All lies. All designed to justify what they'd done, to make themselves look like heroes instead of thieves. They'd even gotten 2 doctors at Sunset Valley to document my declining mental state for their guardianship case, noting that I sometimes seemed withdrawn and detached from reality. Of course I seemed withdrawn. I was trapped in a facility I didn't want to be in, pretending to be helpless while planning my revenge. Their attorney had assured them that my marriage to James could easily be overturned. After all, I was clearly not of sound mind. The deed transfer would be reversed. Everything would go according to their plan. They'd scheduled the final closing for a Friday morning, 10 o'clock sharp. The buyers were ready. The paperwork was prepared. The money was about to change hands. On Thursday evening, I checked myself out of Sunset Valley. I'd been a voluntary admission, so they couldn't stop me. James picked me up at the front entrance, and we drove to my house together. We had 16 hours until the closing. We were ready for war. Friday morning arrived with perfect sunshine, the kind of crisp November day that makes everything feel sharp and clear. James and I were up at dawn, drinking coffee on my porch, watching the street wake up. At 9:45, right on schedule, 3 cars pulled up to my house. David's black Mercedes, Susan's silver SUV, Michael's red Honda. Behind them came a white Lexus with the buyers, a young couple who looked excited and nervous. And finally, a Toyota with the realtor, a woman in a power suit carrying a leather portfolio. You should have seen their faces when they saw James standing on the porch in a suit, arms crossed, looking every bit the attorney he was. And then me, walking out of my front door holding a coffee mug, wearing my favorite blue dress and the biggest smile of my life. David stopped dead on the sidewalk, his face going pale. What? What is she doing here? Mom! Susan's voice was shrill with panic. You're supposed to be at Sunset Valley. I walked down the porch steps slowly, savoring every single second of this moment. Oh, I checked out yesterday, sweetheart. Turns out I'm perfectly healthy and capable of making my own decisions. Funny how that works. Michael grabbed his phone like he was going to call someone, but James cleared his throat. I wouldn't do that if I were you, son. David's face turned from pale to red. This is our closing. You can't just show up here and what? I interrupted, my voice calm and steady. Interfere with your plan to steal my house? The realtor stepped forward, confused. I'm sorry, who are you people? James extended his hand professionally. I'm James Peterson, attorney at law. I'm also Margaret's husband. He let that sink in for a moment. And actually, this is a closing, but not the one you were expecting. He handed David a manila folder. Inside, you'll find our marriage certificate dated 3 months ago. The deed showing joint ownership of this property, also filed 3 months ago, and a restraining order issued this morning, preventing any of you from coming within 100 feet of this house or your mother without her express written permission. Susan snatched the folder from David's hands, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. This can't be legal. She's not mentally competent. Really? James's voice was ice cold. Based on what evidence? The children's attorney, a nervous-looking man in his 30s, was speed reading through the documents, his face growing paler by the second. All of this is completely legal, he whispered. It can't be, Michael shouted. We have doctor's statements. We have documentation of her decline. James smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. You have doctor's notes that say she's experiencing normal aging. Not one single document says she's incompetent. Meanwhile, we have independent medical evaluations from 2 psychiatrists confirming Margaret's complete mental competency. We have video documentation of her daily activities showing perfect cognitive function. We have bank records showing she manages her own finances flawlessly. And we have proof that every decision she made was voluntary, informed, and legally sound. The buyers were backing toward their car, clearly wanting no part of this disaster. Mrs. Chen from next door was standing on her lawn, openly watching. Mr. Harrison had stopped his morning walk. The Johnson kids had paused on their bikes. My children's carefully constructed plan was unraveling in public, in front of witnesses exactly as it should be. Susan looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. You did this on purpose. You tricked us. I met her gaze and didn't flinch. No, sweetheart. You tried to trick me. I just made sure I was still in control of my own life. The legal battle that followed was swift and brutal, at least for my children. They tried everything. They filed emergency motions claiming I'd been coerced into marriage. They demanded competency hearings. They hired a different attorney after the first one dropped them, telling them they had no case. They spent thousands upon thousands of dollars trying to undo what James and I had done. Every single motion was denied. The judge who reviewed the case actually commended James and me during the final hearing. This court finds that Mrs. Peterson, he said, emphasizing my new legal name, acted with full mental capacity and with proper legal counsel. Her decisions were not only sound but admirably proactive. This court sees no evidence of exploitation, only evidence of an intelligent woman protecting herself from exploitation by her own children. That last sentence made David storm out of the courtroom. Susan cried, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of fury and humiliation. The financial consequences hit them hard. They had to return the deposit from Sunset Valley, which they'd already mentally spent. They owed their first attorney over $8,000. The second attorney cost them another $15,000 before he told them to give up. The realtor threatened to sue them for breach of contract and wasted resources. They'd already spent Susan's share on wedding deposits that weren't refundable. David had put money down on business equipment. Michael lost his deposit on the lake house, but the real damage went deeper than money. Their reputations in the community were destroyed. Mrs. Chen told everyone at church what she'd witnessed. The story spread like wildfire through our small town. Parents who'd once respected Susan as a teacher now looked at her differently. David lost 2 business clients who said they couldn't trust someone who'd betray their own mother. Michael's girlfriend broke up with him, telling him she couldn't marry someone capable of such cruelty. Susan's own daughters, my granddaughters, called me crying and apologizing. They were 19 and 22, old enough to understand what their mother had tried to do. "Nana, we didn't know," Emily sobbed on the phone. "We never would have let her do this if we'd known." "I know, sweetheart," I told her. "This isn't your fault." Both girls stopped speaking to Susan for over a year. That hurt her more than anything else, and part of me felt a grim satisfaction knowing she was experiencing just a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. As for me and James, we lived as roommates and dear friends in the house Robert built. We converted the downstairs guest room into James's space, giving him privacy and independence. We shared meals, traded stories, watched old movies together, and kept each other company. It wasn't romantic, but it was comfortable and kind, which was more than enough. James lived for 2 more wonderful years before passing away peacefully in his sleep. He left his half of the house back to me in his will, along with a note I keep in my nightstand. "You were the best friend I could have asked for in my final years. Keep fighting, Maggie. You're stronger than all of them." I'm 71 now, still in my house, still independent, still tending my roses. I replanted Robert's garden, and it's more beautiful than ever. I won more than my house. I won my dignity, my independence, and my future. And every morning when I sit on that porch with my tea, I smile, thinking of Robert and James, knowing they'd both be proud. I'd fought back and I'd won. As I sit here now, looking at the roses blooming in my garden on this beautiful spring morning, I think about everything that happened. It's been 3 years since that confrontation on my front lawn. 3 years since I stood up to my children and took back control of my life. And people always ask me the same question. Do I have any regrets? My answer is always the same. No, not a single one. My children never apologized. Not once. After the legal battles ended and they realized they'd lost everything, they didn't come to me with remorse or shame or any desire to make things right. They sent a few obligatory holiday cards with generic messages. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." "Merry Christmas." No phone calls, no visits, no acknowledgement of what they'd tried to do to me. Some people tell me that's sad. They say I should reach out, that I should forgive them, that family is family, and I'm going to regret this estrangement when I'm on my deathbed. They say holding grudges will only hurt me in the end. But here's what those people don't understand. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting people abuse you. Forgiveness doesn't mean giving up your dignity to keep the peace. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from toxic people, even when those people share your blood. I learned that family isn't just about biology. It's about respect, love, and loyalty. When those things die, sometimes the relationship dies too, and that's not always a tragedy. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's self-respect. Sometimes it's the only way to reclaim your life from people who see you as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome or an asset to liquidate. My real family now consists of my granddaughters, who visit me regularly and bring their boyfriends to meet me. It's Mrs. Chen and the other neighbors who check on me and invite me to dinner. It's my book club ladies who celebrated my 71st birthday with me last month. It's the memory of Robert and James, 2 good men who believed I was worth fighting for. I'm 71 years old now, still in my house, still independent, still proving every single day that being old doesn't mean being weak or helpless or ready to be discarded. I manage my own life, make my own decisions, and answer to no one. I volunteer at the church. I tend my garden. I live on my own terms. The moral of my story is simple, but it's one that everyone needs to hear. Never underestimate the people you think you can control. Never mistake kindness for weakness or love for foolishness. And never, ever bet against someone who has nothing left to lose except their dignity. Because when you corner someone who's been fighting their whole life, who survived loss and heartbreak and every obstacle the world has thrown at them, don't be surprised when they come out swinging. I didn't just survive my children's betrayal, I won. And I want you to know that you can too. Now I want to hear from you. If your own children or anyone in your family tried to put you away and steal everything you'd worked for, what would you do? Would you fight back like I did? Or would you go quietly? Have you experienced something similar? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story touched you, if it made you think or feel something, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about ordinary people who refuse to be victims. Remember, you're never too old to fight for what's yours. You're never too weak to stand up for yourself, and you're never alone. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, stay strong.